Okay, so this is your final video for Merchant of Venice. It'll cover both Act 4 and Act 5, which are, Act 5 only has one scene, and Act 4 only has one scene as well. So Act 4 scene is particularly complex, and Act 5 scene is a little bit shorter, but a little complex as well. Okay, so last video we had talked about the very first moments of Act 4 and how we want to pay attention here to whether Antonio is changing or not in his attitude about Shylock or in his attitude about sadness or death. Is he becoming heroic? Is he becoming admirable? Is there a character change going on, or is he the same depressed guy that he always was? Then you'll see in the next pages that Shylock enters, and if you look at the Duke tries again to convince Shylock to give up, and then here in this particular scene you see Shylock's determined anger. So he's quite angry. There's his eyes, and this is him being angry. I don't have my pen with me, so I'm using my mouse to draw pictures. And so pay attention to his anger. See if you can figure out exactly which lines are the angriest. So here I want you to pay attention and find the angriest lines. In the next page, you see Bassanio try and convince Shylock to give up the bond. Shylock answers him, of course, with repulses him in anger. And this is their exchange. And once again, you can look at how angry Shylock is here. But then this is a very interesting speech here, where Antonio basically asks Shylock to give up. Asks Bassanio to give up. And so he's basically saying to his friend here, it's not worth it. But look at how he ends his speech on the next page with the word Jew. Why does he say that Shylock will never give up? Can you connect Antonio's rationale for why Shylock is as angry as he is? I think you'll notice that Antonio takes no part of the blame there, but says that it's about Shylock's Jewishness. So that's a pretty anti-Semitic passage there. Shylock then comes in with a comment about their hypocrisy and about how Christianity justifies slavery. And so he's saying here, how can you blame me for this evil that I am doing when you have slaves and you justify slaves using your religion? And so he is quite talking about the hypocrisy of Christians here. See if you can look at his logic in this particular passage. The Duke is there to preside over the hearing, and Bassanio is trying to cheer Antonio up. Antonio is he depressed? Is he resigned? Is he heroic? Once again, we really want to try and think about, well, how do you see Antonio in this scene? I'm very interested to see if you think Antonio changes at all in the play or in this scene. So then we have enters Nerissa, disguised as a lawyer's clerk, and Nerissa hands the Duke a paper, which he reads in an aside, and while Shylock is busy sharpening his knife. And so in this particular scene, Graciano and Shylock now have a conversation, and once again we see Shylock's rage as Gratiano tries to convince him to be merciful. Can no prayers pierce thee? Remember, these are the same people that have bullied Shylock in several scenes before. So it's interesting now that they're so stunned that he's not going to have mercy. The Duke then comes back and says that the letter that Nerissa delivered him, remember Nerissa is disguised as a man, she's disguised as a law clerk, says that the judge is missing and sick at home. And so another judge, a substitute judge, has been sent, and enters the substitute judge, and it is Portia, disguised as Balthazar. So now Nerissa and Portia are now disguised as the judge and the law clerk of the trial. So Portia has engineered a way to basically be the one who judges her husband Bassanio's best friend Antonio. This is a very interesting scene. Portia basically steals the entire scene from this moment on. She says, hey, I've heard about the case, and they asked both of them to stand forth, and she says, are all the facts true? And then this is a very, very famous speech by Portia where she makes an argument about the concept of mercy. This is a very famous line. The quality of mercy is not strained. This is a super important speech about why we must be merciful even when we are powerful. Why the powerful, and Shylock, of course, has all the power in this scene, why the powerful must be merciful. And I think that this concept is very much a philosophical concept that the Christian world was debating, and that other religions have debated for a long time. Why should we be nice to our enemies, especially when we have the power over our enemies? So this is a super important speech about the concept of mercy to your enemies. I'd love for you to pay attention to this speech. The logic in it is important not just for this play, but for really all of human literature has been discussing this concept of mercy. Shylock, of course, rejects it, says no in this little couplet here. Portia says, hey, doesn't he have the money? Bassanio says, yeah, come on, I got twice the sum. And then a little bit later he says, I've got 3 times the sum. And of course, Shylock will not take it because Antonio did not get the money in on time, so he will not take the money now. He wants a pound of flesh, and Portia decides, well, by law, this Jew may claim a pound of flesh. Once again, she says, be merciful. Come on, your last chance, Shylock. She's giving Shylock several chances to be merciful. Come on, last chance, Shylock. Take 3 times the money and tear up the bond, tear up the contract. Shylock once again rejects the concept of mercy. And he wants the money. And then Shylock and Portia kind of go back and forth a little bit. And then Portia says, okay, well, it's time to get out the knife. And Shylock is happy now. Finally, Shylock is happy with a big smiley face because the judge has agreed with him. And she says to Shylock, she says to Antonio, prepare your bosom for his knife. And Shylock is very happy with the judge. And then in this scene, I'd love for you to think about how Portia, in this particular moment, is manipulating Antonio. She, through several lines here, she's got a trick up her sleeve where she's going to rescue Antonio, but she makes it seem here like Antonio is a goner. And what is she trying to do to Antonio in this scene by making it seem several moments? Yep, get ready. He's going to come in and carry, lay forth your bosom. Yep. Or do we have balances to weigh out the flesh to make sure it's just a pound? Yep. And then all of a sudden, she comes in with her trick. Aha! Here is the trick. This is Portia's trick up her sleeve. She says, Shylock, on your charge, do you have some surgeon to stop his wounds lest he bleed to death? Well, if you take a pound of somebody's flesh, they're going to bleed to death. Shylock says, wait a minute, am I supposed to keep him from bleeding to death? Portia says, well, it's not in the contract, but it is in the contract. Shylock says, I haven't looked at the contract. It doesn't say anything about blood and keeping him from bleeding to death. And then Portia looks at Antonio one more time, and Antonio these are his last words. Analyze Antonio's last words once again to see if he has changed. His last words. Has Antonio changed? This is a fascinating moment here, super important, that follows, because Bassanio then says, even though I'm married now, of course, to Portia, who he doesn't realize is disguised as the judge. Here's Portia. He says, and I love my wife, I would very much give everything here to this devil to deliver you. And Portia's standing right in front of him, and he's saying, I don't value my wife as much as I value our friendship. And she says in a small aside something to the effect of, this is very interesting if your wife were to hear you say that. And Graciano also says, I just married Nerissa. Remember, he's the guy who married Nerissa, Portia's servant. And Nerissa is standing there, and she's a clerk. And so the men are in trouble here. The men are getting themselves in trouble without even knowing it, because Graciano and Bassanio are saying that they would gladly give up their wives in order to save Antonio, and their wives are standing right there disguised as the judge and the law clerk. And so Nerissa is not too happy about this either. Shylock says, come on, this is what Christians feel about their wives. These are Christian husbands. This is the kind of person that married my daughter. And Portia once again says, okay, it's time for the sentence. Shylock says, okay, come on, most learned judge, I'm really happy with you, let's do it. And then Portia really comes in with the second part of her trick. She hinted previously on the previous pages that, you got to make sure he doesn't bleed to death. And now all of a sudden she says, it's this technicality about flesh. And Portia comes in with a technicality to say that you can take a pound of his flesh, but you can't take any of his blood. In the laws of Venice, a Jew cannot spill Christian blood. So what she's doing is she is telling Shylock, so she's preserving the reputation of the Venetian court system by saying, indeed, contracts must be honored, and Antonio did not pay you back on time, and therefore you deserve a pound of his flesh. So law is preserved. On the other hand, another law is that Jews, or anyone who's not Christian, cannot spill Christian blood. So she's telling Shylock, you've got to figure out a way to take a pound of his flesh without spilling a drop of his blood. And suddenly everybody realizes that Portia has been playing Shylock all along, and Shylock, of course, is devastated. She says, come on, Shylock, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and and cut off a pound of his flesh without shedding any blood. And if you shed any blood, then you'll have to give up all of your goods and you'll be killed. So you got to figure out a way to take a pound of his flesh without shedding any blood. And Graciano and everybody else is so relieved and so excited. And Shylock says, okay, well then just give me my money. Bassiano is ready to go ahead and give it to him. And Portia says, wait a minute, he's refused. So now Portia is really laying into Shylock. She's saying, no, he doesn't get his money either. He's already refused in open court. Graciano is now really excited. He's like the cheerleading squad going, all right, all right, all right. And he's saying, aha, 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 we've got you, Jew. We've got you, Jew. Shylock says, I can't even get my money back. Portia says, you can't even have a forfeiture to be so taken at thy peril. Shylock begins to exit and leave. He's so angry. And then Portia comes in with the last bit of her trick on Shylock, and she says that not only is it a law that if a Jew or an alien shed Christian blood, that they should be killed and all their goods forfeit, but it's also a law that if an alien, the word alien is in here somewhere, oh, there it is, that if an alien has even indirectly or directly contrived against the very life of a Christian, then thou must be incurred the danger formerly by me rehearsed. In other words, you've got to give up all of your money to the court, half of your goods to the court, the other half to the person that you threatened, and you should be killed. And so, wow, Shylock is now not only going to get a pound of Antonio's flesh, he's not only going to get his money back, he's also going to lose all of his own money, and he is going to be executed. So this has gone quite badly for Shylock. Portia has engineered the entire thing. Shylock is devastated. And this is very interesting. I would love for you to really take apart this moment and ask yourself, is this the change we've all been waiting for from Antonio? In this monologue, Antonio says, no, don't take his money. Let him keep his money as long as he promises to change to be a Christian, to convert to Christianity, and that he give his money to Lorenzo and his daughter. And what I want you to do is I want you to ask yourself, would Antonio have been this merciful at the beginning of the play? Is this mercy to force Shylock to become a Christian? And how does the trial that Portia put Antonio through, making Antonio think that he was going to be executed in a long, drawn-out fashion, how has that maybe affected Antonio's view? Probably people would have seen this as a merciful. Instead of killing Shylock, he just has to convert to Christianity. Shylock is broken, devastated, and he agrees. You have this next scene between Portia and Bassanio, and they are, again, Bassanio doesn't realize it's Portia. He thinks it's the judge because she's disguised. And Portia and Bassanio are talking about, Bassanio says, man, I really owe you. And Portia, as the judge, says, well, hey, how much you owe me? You owe me some money. I need payment for my services as a judge. And she says, I want the ring on your finger. And that's, of course, his wedding ring, the ring that Portia gave him, and he promised never to leave, and he gives it to her. Can you see why does he give the ring to Portia? What's his rationale that he's able to give up his ring to the judge, that he doesn't realize it's Portia, but he says, oh, okay, I'll give up the ring, and here's why. Here's why it's worth it. I think you'll find that very interesting, and I think you'll find that Portia and Nerissa will find that very interesting as well. The very next scene, I'm sorry, there are two scenes, it was very short in the act. In the very next scene, Graciano does the same thing with his ring, giving it to Nerissa. Portia kind of makes him do that. And once again, you will see, I'd love for you to say, what is Graciano's rationale for giving up his ring? He doesn't know it's Nerissa that he's giving it to. He thinks he's giving his wedding ring to the law clerk. Last but not least, we get the final act. This is Act 5. These are supposedly the happy couples. Jessica and Lorenzo are quite grumpy with each other. This goes all the way back to that scene with Lancelot in Act 3, where Lorenzo kind of walked in on Jessica and Lancelot flirting with each other, and they're a little bit grumpy with each other. The marriage does not seem terribly happy at this moment. Stefano arrives and says that several people have arrived. We find out that it is, then Lancelot enters to kind of announce the people who are arriving, and to make a long story short, in walks Antonio and Bassanio and Graciano, and they are all very excited to tell Portia and Nerissa the news that they have won the trial. Of course, what they don't realize is that Portia and Nerissa were at the trial. They were the judge and the clerk, so they do not realize it. Well, meanwhile, Nerissa takes Graciano aside and starts kind of laying into him for giving up his ring. Where's his ring? Portia and Bassanio, meanwhile, are talking, and Bassanio is telling her how much he loves him and loves her and how happy he is that Antonio is free. And then Graciano pipes in, hey, come on, stop harping on me about my ring. I had to give it up to the law clerk, and Portia wants to know about the quarrel. And then in this scene here, Bassiano has to admit that he gave up the ring, his ring as well, and Portia is very upset that he did not live up to his contract. And so what she's doing here is she's really forcing her husband to admit that he has already betrayed her by prioritizing his friend over their marriage. It's also a kind of contract that he's lost. What has Portia and Nerissa done for their marriage? Who is now going to be in charge of their marriage? Because Bassiano and Graciano have broken their promise to their wives, which was a kind of deal or contract. You will see now that this woman, who at the very beginning of the play had no control over who she was going to marry, had no control over her money, a very independent woman, a woman who was so independent that she could dress up as a judge and engineer this whole scheme, has now figured out a way to basically humble her husband and control him for the rest of their marriage. Bassiano agrees that that he will abide by Portia's new rules, and as does Graciano. And she also figures out a way to get Antonio to promise that since Bassiano and Graciano gave up their rings for him, that he owes her. And so now Portia is in charge, basically, or is owed a new contract, a new deal from all of them. From Antonio, Bassiano, and Graciano. What's the new deal, the new contract that Portia now has with all of these men? Then she does the big reveal and says, aha, by the way, after she's got control of them, she's got promises from them that they owe her forever. Now, all of a sudden, she reveals, by the way, we were the clerks. Ha, ha, ha. We got you. And this is the trick on them, where she has the contract. They realize that they have been won over with the contract. But you know what? They're pretty happy about it. They're happy to be in Portia's debt because she is a sweet lady. She also brings news to Antonio that his ships have come in. Several of the ships that he thought were lost are actually come in and safe. And so I would love, at the very end of the play, which is a comedy and ends in marriage. Comedies are always supposed to end in marriages. This comedy ends where all the marriages are contracts. Are they financial contracts? What is the play saying about what makes a good marriage work? The only thing that's left that's not on stage is Shylock. And Shylock never appears in Act 5, but we know that he's been forced to convert. And a lot of directors actually have that scene performed, of course with no words, because Shakespeare did not write the words. And it's interesting to ask yourself whether, if you had that scene performed with Shylock in a Christian church converting to Christianity, whether you would have him humbled, broken, and asking to become a Christian in an open way, or whether you would have Shylock resentful, angry, and feeling like he is forced to be a Christian. There are some productions, indeed, where he is even chained, struggling, bound, and forced to the altar, forced into the baptismal pool, and almost as if he is being drowned, forced to become a Christian, a forced conversion, which would have been quite familiar to the Elizabethan audience, whose medieval world has undergone the Spanish Inquisition in the last few years. The Queen Elizabeth's father, Henry, has banned all Jews who did not convert from England. There have been lots of forced conversions in recent medieval history, and so the Elizabethans probably could have visualized a very ugly forced conversion scene. Is this a comedy? This play is supposedly a comedy. I would love your opinions on that, and frankly, your test will be to have opinions about all the issues that I have raised in Act 4 and Act 5. Make sure that you watch this video perhaps more than once, you read the acts, and you annotate your text carefully.